Hello, everyone. It's me, Andrew. I'm here in my home in lovely Ligonier, Pennsylvania. Hopefully, you all have had a good start to your week so far. Of course, whenever I turn on the camera, it's like my allergies start kicking up. Um, Anyways, hopefully, you all are doing well. If you're tuning in, say hello and say where you're tuning in from. I always like to see where people are watching. Um, I know where some of you all are. Yeah, so today was another busy day here in the Allegory Gallery world. Um, I've been taking or participating in Metalworks Spring Symposium. It's a virtual symposium that's happening all week long. So I've been watching that. And today they had two really amazing presenters. Um, Nancy Megan Corwin did some chasing and repoussé in the morning. And then in the afternoon, which just finished a couple of minutes ago, um, Adam Atkinson was showing how to make some hollow form vessels and using layering. So that was pretty cool. I really enjoyed it. And then on day one, it was, I think, James Cook. And in the evening, it was Margaret. Um, I think her last name's Steele. Um, and they did CAD, which went completely over my head. And then in the afternoon, powder coating. So it was interesting to see how she does her powder coating because it's a little bit different than the way that I was taught how to do it. So it's always neat to see how people do things because then you can kind of play around with your own techniques and tips and tricks and put your own spin on things and learn new things and adapt. And sometimes it's good confirmation for your own practice. Like it's always nice to hear why somebody does what they do. And then you're like, oh, well, I do that also. So I think that's helpful. Even if you don't learn something new necessarily, sometimes it's good to get that kind of confirmation. But it's always good to learn something new as well. I see Norma's watching. Hey, Norma. Um, yeah. So besides that, I've been kind of um, doing a lot of getting things like dotting the T's or crossing the T's and dotting the I's kind of work. So I was lucky enough to win a grant from the Society of Inclusive Blacksmiths to take in a workshop with Elizabeth Brim at the Center for Metal Arts. And so it's kind of finishing up the details on that end today and getting all the forms in and getting payment in for that. And then we also are volunteering this weekend at Contemporary Craft in Pittsburgh, and we're going to be doing a rolling mill project. And I didn't know we were going to do it until recently. Like today was the day that I got the confirmation that we were doing it. So I had to order materials for that and make sure that we had everything ready to go for that. So it's been a kind of a day of like running around doing this and doing that. All good things, definitely, but just a lot of things. Teresa's watching. Hey, Teresa. Marianne's watching. Hey, Marianne. Norma says, congratulations on that. Thanks. I was super excited to hear about that. For me, I kind of just, I cast a wide net and I apply to a lot of things. And like the week before, I had gotten news from them that I didn't win something. But then a week later, I found out that I won something else. So I'm super excited about that. And last night, William shared some paintings that I recently made from the Wildwood series that I'm I'm doing, and they're kind of these green man kind of mask-like paintings. And thank you to everybody who got one of those. That's helped. Will help offset some of the costs for some of my classes. I really believe in education and furthering education and learning wherever you can, and never to stop learning. So it really means a lot to me when people get my artwork and I can take money that off of the things that I've made and put that directly into learning how to make more things. So thank you. Um, I don't know if William got everything up um, uh, from that on the website. If he did, they should be on the website, and that's allegorygallery.com, and you can check out those. Um, and if not, then maybe tonight. And yeah, so what else besides that? So yeah, so we got some kind of mixed news about Star Cottage Studio. So we have to get a certain kind of insurance because it's a commercial building and the mortgage is a commercial mortgage. So it's a little bit trickier than getting like regular insurance. And so we've been kind of waiting for to hear back about a new policy, and the quote that they gave us was like 5 times, 4 to 5 times as much as our home, or the new building in Johnstown. And so that was kind of a little bit stressful because it was, it's a lot of money to be paying every month. So one of the things that I've been doing is researching. Oh, well, I should back up a little bit. So one of the things that they do to kind of create that evaluation is they send somebody to go look at the property, and they only can see from the outside because they didn't ask to come inside. And so the cottage looks pretty rough on the outside, but because we've spent most of our money and resources on fixing up the inside, which I mean, there's still work to go on everything, but we haven't really done too much on the exterior. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, we bought maybe a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, we bought a cottage, which was a 100-year-old school built house that we're converting into my studio and the shipping and fulfillment for the shop, for the online store. So whenever we have a background and there's beads in the background, um, and the rainbow background, that's where we're filming. But that's also where we do a lot of our filming for our videos and YouTube videos and stuff like that. Jen, in theory, is over there filming now. So I did not, otherwise I would be doing this there, but because they're filming there for the Saturday tutorials that we do, Barnaby wanted to say hi. He hasn't seen Cinnamon in a while. But anyway, so since they're filming there, I'm over here. So I had to run back and forth while watching the symposium. So that was interesting. Luckily, there's only like one little spot where we get near the sheets, and that's where the service kind of cuts out. I think they have blockers. I don't know if that's legal or not, but they have blockers. And so it kind of went out for a second there. But otherwise, I kind of watched while I was getting things ready for this. And yeah. So, anyways, the outside is a little bit rough, especially where the weather hits. And so, part of their notes was that if we fix up the outside of the building, then the amount that we have to pay per month goes down. So, and I think what that's from is around here, and I guess a lot of places, people will buy kind of hoopty properties, or basically like that's the ones that need the TLC. Um, and they'll something will happen to them and they'll take out big insurance policies for little money, and then when something happens to that building then they collect money on that. So this is a way for them to deter people from committing fraud basically, um, which is understandable. It's just we were not really planning on doing that. We weren't really planning on fixing up the outside this year, or at least as soon as we're going to have to. Yeah, so I've been researching different ways that we can change the outside and kind of do it cost effectively. Um, I'd love to get the whole thing done, but I think that that's going to be out of our reach right now. So we're going to have to ramp up some fundraising efforts pretty soon, and get that ball rolling on that so that we can get a new insurance policy, um, on the cottage. Um, so yeah, it's a lot of research into things that I didn't think that I would have to know. Like I was thinking about doing this process called board and batten, which is where they kind of put up one board and then they put another, and wherever there's a seam they put another board. And it's a really kind of popular look right now, and it's usually done for kind of agrarian buildings. And I thought it would be easier to do that than doing the cedar shingles the way that we have it now, because then you just have to put three boards instead of like 30 shingles or whatever, however that breaks down to. But I don't know, because cost wise, the boards are more. So we're gonna have to get some estimates, or the probably what we're gonna end up doing in the meantime is get patch any places that's really rough, and then paint the whole thing, and then that way probably we can get it a lot uh, uh, less expensive. The daffodils are starting to bloom there now, so I don't necessarily want to start doing construction and trampling those. But those should give us about a month or so, maybe a little bit more, to fundraise and collect materials and get that going. And then by the time they're done blooming, then I should be able to. Then we can start working on the outside of that. So that was another project that I was working on today. Yeah, so there's a lot of things like um, that I've been doing. And then I got up early and I started making soup, and I did laundry and washed the dishes and cleaned the kitchen and got yeah, some stuff ready. And it feels like I'm all in a lot of the things. I'm like halfway done with everything. So yeah, and some of the things I've been doing at the cottage, like there's a little in between break in between the sessions, as I was doing a little bit of spring cleaning, for more spring cleaning lots. So if you saw last week, that was the first week of the spring cleaning sale. We've only been doing maybe 15 lots a day, and you never know what you're going to get. I've had a couple of requests and I've tried to find some of the things, but yeah, it's kind of tricksy sometimes. Um, but because I'm trying not to, like, sometimes people will have spring cleaning sales, but they'll order stuff in and then resell the stuff that they ordered. But for me, like, I want a real spring cleaning sale where I'm taking things that I'm not going to use, or I want to send out into the world and take that and cull it from my studio and then put that out into the world. So hopefully somebody else will be able to use it. and then make space in my studio and kind of clear old projects away and do that. And if you haven't seen any of those, you can watch them on the replay and on YouTube. I definitely recommend watching everything on YouTube because you can. It's a little bit of a higher resolution, and you can really zoom in and look at things, and you can stop and kind of rewind, and you get a better view of stuff. So if you, if you've missed any of that, definitely check it out because there's some good things and there's lots of stuff still available. And I think for the rest of the week, we're going to be adding new new spring cleaning lots. And William has been pretty good about invoicing. I think he's pretty caught up on invoicing. But shipping, we're a little bit delayed because Barb is still out. She's coming back tomorrow. William and I were at the cottage pretty late last night doing some shipping just to keep our heads above water. You know, as best we can, but there's still a lot of shipping left to do. So we're working our way through it. Michelle's watching. Hey, Michelle. And oh my, I'm way behind. Marianne says, I was invoiced for my choice of painting. Oh, good. I'm glad you got it. That's one of my favorites from that series. And Teresa said that she read about this on the Patreon. If you did not know, we have a Patreon account, and I try to update at least once a week, but sometimes more, sometimes less. Here's the address here for the Patreon account, patreon.com/Star Cottage Studio, all one word, lowercase. And so I try to update. I'd love to do it every day, but there's just not enough time. So maybe one day, but at least once a week. And when it's really busy, then not. But we try to make it work. And folks saw Barnaby. He has run away and gone downstairs. William might be home right now. I don't know or not. So he runs down there and begs to go outside. It turned out pretty nice. It was a little bit chilly, and then it got warm, and then maybe it just got warm because I was running up and down the stairs. But yeah, Jane's watching. Hi, Jane. Michelle says, I didn't get a notice for this video. So William has a thing where he sets up notifications for when he goes live, and he can set them up before, and it does this thing where people can filter in, and it will say, oh, we'll be tuning it, or we'll be starting shortly. I'm not that high tech yet. William knows how to do that, and he'll have to show me how to do that. So that might be why you didn't get a notification today. I got a notification for YouTube, so I know that some notification went out, but it wasn't the regular one. Norma says that she likes board and batten a lot. Sally says, quick sneak in from me. I'll be back back a bit after 5. Oh, good. And then Michelle said that she saw my post asking about the outside of the building. Yeah, so that's something that we have to do pretty soon, and much sooner than we thought. And I don't know when our current policy expires, but I don't know why we have to switch. I think it's for bundling stuff, and it's supposed to be cheaper, or because I don't know. Amanda's watching. Hey, Amanda. Harry's watching. Hi, Harry. And yeah. So Harry said that it's 49 and sunny there, and he was sitting outside with his cat Midnight, and he was Midnight was loving the attention and the sun. Yeah, Barnaby has been asking to go out all day, but I've been running around back and forth, back and forth. So I haven't had a chance to go out, and I think he's a little bit disgruntled about that. Gilbert, he is just asleep. He just sleeps in. It's quiet. Sometimes he has to go out, but he does this thing where he kind of goes like this on the glass or whatever, and it's super cute, but he's pretty quiet. Barnaby, he's gonna like tell you about it, and if you don't pay attention, he kind of tries to make himself known so that he can get outside. So yeah. All right. So today's project, what we're going to do is we're going to make a pair of ginkgo leaf earrings. And one of the things that we did is we went, I can't remember what we did exactly, but we had some kind of fundraiser. I don't know if we sold gemstones or something. And we got, or maybe some paintings, probably paintings. And we got a little bit of money and we got a hydraulic press. And it's something that I really wanted for the studio. Part of my residency at Contemporary Craft last year was spent working with the hydraulic press there and getting familiar with it and kind of understanding what to do and how to use it. So when we did finally get ours, we drove to Kentucky and picked it up. One of the things that we got in addition to the hydraulic press is pancake dies, and so we have the option of cutting out shapes. Now it's like, what do you do with these shapes? So for our own work, we've been doing kind of enameling work with them. But I thought that, and I haven't talked to William about this, but maybe he'll be interested, maybe not, is that we'll cut some shapes and make some small kits, maybe, or just, I don't know. We still have to figure out the logistics of it. But I thought it might be nice to do maybe some kits with them. But we'll see. So for today's project, we're going to do ginkgo earrings, and I'm thinking of putting a kit together. And if you're interested in how they turn out and you want to do them, let me know in the comments, maybe after we get the ball rolling. And if you all ask at the end, if you all want me to do a kit, and maybe I'll put together a limited edition of this kit, because I don't have everything, like a lot. Like with some of the things I can make more of, but with some things I only have a small amount. So even if we don't do the kits later on, I think this video will still be useful because we're going to talk about some adding texture to metal. And we're also going to be talking about adding color to metal and making simple pair of earrings. So even if we don't do the kits and don't end up doing them, this video will still hopefully be useful and entertaining and worthwhile to watch. All right. Okay, so I am going to flip the camera around and I'm gonna break this up into kind of like two, I don't want to call them segments because it kind of, but it's gonna be kind of like two things. And what we're going to do first is work on metalwork. And what I've been trying to do, we did some metalworking videos before, and one of the comments that we got was, I wish that I could do that, but I really don't have a lot of money and I don't have these tools, and I really wish I could do it, but I just can't. So one of the things that I've been kind of being kept in the back of my mind is to do projects that are more accessible, so that you don't necessarily have to have a lot of different tools. And even though I love tools and I collect tools, it took me a long time to get the tools that I have now. And not everybody's in a position to do that. So I've been thinking of different ways that I can kind of show things that are interesting to me, and but also show things that are budget friendly alternatives. And I can talk about some different ways to keep the price down on doing these projects, so you're not constantly always breaking the bank every time you want to do one of our tutorials or classes. I know that sometimes people will watch videos and they end up buying a bunch of stuff, and then it just like sits there because they don't have the time or the energy to do that. So I always try to think, or at least recently, of ways that we can do certain things, but do them in a way that it's more accessible to people. So just keep that in mind. I will be showing kind of alternatives to some of the things that's more specialized, and hopefully keep the price down for y'all so that y'all don't end up breaking the bank every time you watch one of our videos. Um, because a lot of the stuff we don't actually sell either. So that also is not necessarily a good move on our part. So we'll show you some different ways, or I'll show you some different ways that you can do it and do it kind of budget friendly. And it also, I think that the cool thing about some of these ideas is that they are kind of granular, or they're like little seeds, and they're little foundation steps where you can take certain ideas that I'm going to show you today and apply them in your own way. So if you're not really into ginkgo leaves, you can still take these ideas and modify them for your own personal expression however you want, and really make it your own and kind of build on this. So that way you're not just constantly duplicating things that I show you, but you take those ideas and make them your own, which is also really important to us. Now, if you want to make the things and you want to make it exactly like how we're going to make it today, okay, that's cool too. Melissa says, I am terrible about doing this, seeing, liking, wanting to do, buying, and then losing steam and not actually finishing. Yeah, even I do this too, which is potentially dangerous.
Hello, everybody.
William's here. Are you filming with Jen today?
Yeah, it's 6:30.
Okay, good. I was gonna do this over there,
I wasn't sure if you'd be done in time, so I was wondering if you were here or there. I saw you pop on.
I was running around, y'all. It was a little bit.
I saw you up there. I turned the heat up for you, and then I saw you came back home, and you were doing the live from here.
Yeah, well, I was gonna start the pellet stove because the cottage gets a little bit chilly.
It's supposed to be in the 20s, I think, the next few nights.
And so I don't want Jen to be over there shivering during the YouTube video. And if you didn't see it already, check that out because that was a really cute project that she made. And if you got any of the Czech glass stuff that we had from the trunk show, it's gone now. It's gone now. No more, no mas, finito. But if you got some and you want to use that for that project, that would be perfect. Ronnie's watching. Hello. And Ronnie said, you got me at Ginkgo. A kit would be a plus plus. I have a small ginkgo tree that is very special to me. Love the unique leaf shape. I love ginkgos. I should say, I should probably have said that earlier, but I think they're such a cool tree. Now, I'm gonna be honest with y'all. I love them, but they are some ginkgo trees. And I mean, the symbolism is really cool. They are symbols of immortality, and for medicinal wise, ginkgo biloba, people will take it to enhance their memory or to prevent them from having memory loss. Um, and it's one of the oldest still living botanicals. And there are stories of places being bombed, and the last thing that was remaining was a ginkgo leaf. They're really cool because they're super sturdy. And in urban planning, they plant ginkgo trees because it clears up pollution, which is pretty cool. They can survive a lot of different, very hostile environments. And for me, I think that's super, super duper cool. The one thing that I will say is that the fruit, when it rots, it stinks terribly. It smells so bad. And there is this tree that was outside of where I went to school, and there was this class, and the teacher, I'll never forget this. They were like, "Y'all gotta wash your shoes when you walk in here, and wipe your feet." And he brought in this special rug so people could brush their shoes off, because they would step in the rotten fruit and then track it in, and it smells kind of like dog poop, y'all. I'm not exaggerating. It's a terrible smell. So yeah, that's one of the drawbacks I was mentioning. But I love the leaves, and I particularly love the leaves in autumn because they turn this beautiful golden color. Um, but let me tell you, the fruit, it stinks. So um, if you get one, you might just have to keep that in mind, because yeah. Marion says, I may have to break a piggy bank or two. Yeah, I feel ya. I feel ya. Um, Jane says, we used hardy board to replace the original wood board and batten on the back of our house. I don't know how it compares money wise, but it resists moisture better, if that is an issue for your cottage. Yeah, so there's some different things that we've been looking at. They make a synthetic that it looks like traditional board and batten, but it will last much longer. And one of the reasons why, like, I love the look of the shakes or the shingles or whatever, but the issue is that you have to do them regularly. So the initial outlay is cheaper, but you have to do it more often. So replacing them, and so I know that, like, for us, we're usually consistently busy. So if I can do it one time and then not have to think about it for 20 years, then I would probably go that route. But generally speaking, that costs more. So it's one of those things we have to kind of figure things out. Um, Jane says, Ronnie, I'm with you. I love all things ginkgo thanks to a special ginkgo tree at my childhood summer camp. Yeah, one of the things I thought about is there's a couple places in the woods behind the cottage where there aren't trees. And I was thinking of like making this little grove of ginkgo trees so that when you're like walking in the autumn, you're just like walking in there and it's all red and browns, and then you get to this little grove and it's like a solid circle of gold, and that like vivid, bright, vibrant gold color. But we'll see. um, William's mom has one in her front yard, so so I might take a clipping and see if I can get it going. Marion says, I'll stick with aspens for fall gold leaves. Um, so we can see about, you could probably modify this. What I would say to do this is you'd have to cut your own shapes for the aspen leaves, but Cheryl says, I'll be rewatching later. Walking the pup. Hope you're having a great week. And Lorraine is watching now, and Cindy's watching now. Hey, y'all. All right, so let's get to it before more people have to like come and go. Um, so you're gonna see the ceiling for a second. And then let me flip this around. All right. So they added a new button and I pressed the new button and it didn't do what I thought it would do. So, all right. So I talked a little bit about the ginkgo leaves, and here are the blanks that we're going to be using in today's project. I'll zoom. I'll try to get a little bit closer for y'all. Oh, and William always likes to remind me that if you can like and share our videos, we'd much appreciate it. We're trying to grow our YouTube following. We, for a long time, we kind of ignored our YouTube channel and put our focus in other things and building up other groups and stuff. And and we didn't really put any energy into our YouTube. And now we're like, oh crap, we should have spent more time doing that. But anyways, so here are the shapes, and I wish that using the pancake die that they would come out perfectly and you didn't have to do any kind of fixing. But this, and I did it in 24 gauge copper. And you may notice that it's matte, and it's not like super shiny like regular copper. And there's a reason for that. And I'll go into it in a second. So when you use a pancake die, it's basically a shape that's been cut into a piece of steel. And it's got a lip, and you slip your piece of metal into that shape. And let me draw it real quick in case it doesn't make sense. So a pancake die, if this is a sheet of steel, and say you have a circle shape, and then it has kind of a tab, and it's cut like this. And so what ends up happening is, and then there's a hole here, and here. And so what this does is it pries up, and then you can slip your piece of metal in there. And then so when you cut it, or when you put this in there, then the hydraulic press, this is such a terrible kind of illustration of this. But so you have your piece up here, and this is your hydraulic press. Very classy hydraulic press run right there. So you put your pancake die here, and it's got the metal in there, and then you jack this up. We have a manual one, so you have to crank this up and down, and this closes the space. And then what happens is it smashes it down, and it does a shearing cut. So sometimes when you have cutters, like these cutters, they are sharp on this edge, and it only cuts on that edge. What this does is when you have two pieces of metal like this, like or rather, so when you have that piece of metal and this gets pushed down, it cuts right here. So it's really good for cutting shapes quickly. Otherwise, you have to cut this out with a saw, or you have to cut it out with like a really high powered laser. We have a laser, but it does not cut metal. And we also don't have a water jet. And if I had to cut these out by hand, it would just it would take forever. Now, if you don't have the pancake die and you still wanted to do this, you could definitely take a piece of metal, 24 gauge or thinner, and draw your shape out, and then use shears, and you can cut this out. So if you don't want to buy these from us, you can still make your own copper blanks. Now, what I did is I'm going to anneal, if we do any kits or sell any of these for this project, I'll anneal and pickle these before we send them out, so that if you don't have a torch, you can still do this. Now, when you are cutting your metal in a pancake die like this, it's important that you don't anneal the metal first, because when you anneal your metal, you're softening it. So the goal is not to have it bend down in here like this, but to have it have a clean shear. So you don't want to anneal before, but you do want to anneal after, so that when you are creating your texture, it will be easier to take it'll be your texture. So whenever you do this, you'll get a burr around the edge of your design, which then you have to clean up. So after I cut this with the pancake die and the hydraulic press, then I went around and used the grinder and ground off a majority of the burr on the edge, which is kind of like, you know, uh kind of a lip of thin metal that didn't get cut completely smooth and even. So I went around and did that, and then just ran a file real quick and just kind of cleaned it up real fast. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into preparing the blanks, but once you have the blank, then what you need is not a lot. So if we do decide to do kits, we'll put these blanks that are cut and deburred and annealed, which annealing metal is you heat it till it's kind of cherry red, and it relaxes the kind of molecular structure of the metal so that it's softer and you can manipulate it a little bit more. Um, so if you want to do that, if you want to manipulate metal, it's best to do it when it's annealed. Well, I mean, I guess you could do it when it's not annealed, but the problem is that you're work hardening it as you're texturing it, and you can cause problems where there's breakage, or you just won't get as a clean impression. So when you get these, or in this state, that's why they're kind of that dull shine like this, is because they've been annealed, brought up to temperature, cooled, and then pickled. And pickle solution is basically, it's a cleaner and cleans off all the fire scale. So copper, when it's heated up, it gets this a black scale on it, and so pickling cleans that off. So anyways, that's a long way of saying that here's the blanks for the project today. And I'm going to show you two different ways that you can texture the metal. And one is a little bit more high budget, and the other is a little bit more low budget. You still need a couple things, but I'll talk about ways that you can kind of DIY them. Um, so yeah, all right. So one thing we will need for certain is some kind of bench block situation. If you don't have a bench block, we sell little anvils, and they're super cute, and they're super affordable for what they are. The only thing about the bench, or the tiny anvils, is that the work surface is not very big. It's like this big. So you don't really have as much room to do bigger things. Um, and there's one process that I'm going to be showing that it's just a little bit harder to do if you don't have uh, a larger surface. So what I recommend is using steel. And you can get steel bench blocks from a lot of different places. If you want a bigger one like this, let us know and you can see what we can get, because we don't usually sell these in the shop, but um, sometimes we can get them. And they also have 6-inch plate ones, which are really good. Now, this table is not necessarily ideal for this project, and because it's kind of a bouncy one, and this is also William's computer table. Generally speaking, when I'm doing stuff, I have my anvil or I have tables with big sturdy legs. So you do want to have a table that is sturdy. Now, in since we don't necessarily have the most sturdy of tables, I'm going to reposition the camera and my bench block, and we're going to go over here. And the reason, let me get this out of the way first, because one of our friends' addresses was on there. But what we're going to do is we're going to reposition the bench block over here. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I want to position my bench block over the leg of the table. So what that means is if you do this in the middle of a table and it's not a sturdy table, you're going to get a lot of springing action, kind of like a trampoline. And that's not necessarily going to be good for what we're trying to do. All right. So we're going to position our bench block over the table leg. It's important that we do this so when we hit this, the force is going to go straight down into the leg, and it's going to be met with resistance here. And if it's not going to be here, it's not going to be like it's not going to be like a trampoline. All right. So the next thing we're going to need for this step is a hammer with a sharp wedge. Now, this is a hammer that my friend Brenda Schwader, designed and that Bill Fretz produced, and it's called Now That's a Hammer. Now, these are not necessarily inexpensive hammers. They're worth it, and they do have a stake on the other end, which you can use for other metal forming. If you clamp this in a vise, you can use this side. So it's kind of like you're getting 2 for 1 with this kind of hammer. So you can definitely do this. Now, it kind of makes it more, like cost per wear if you get 2 kind of uses out of it. Now, if you don't have this hammer, this particular hammer, you can also get what's called a riveting hammer. And a riveting hammer is basically the same thing, except usually it's just the head that has that wedge, and it's usually a wood handle, and those you can get pretty inexpensively. And if you are looking for anything, like if you want something like a riveting hammer and you don't want to go and buy it somewhere else, you just email us at info@allegorygallery.com, and we can always try to hook you up. And if we don't sell it, we can send you an affiliate link, or we can you know point you in the right direction so that so that we all kind of benefit from the situation if it's something that we can make money off of. If you're gonna you know shop local, y'all, or support your small independent bead store. um All right. So if you want, like I said, you can use this. Now that's a hammer, and you got the wedge shape, or you can use a riveting hammer. Both the riveting hammer is super useful. I do cold connections, and I use my riveting hammer all the time. So it's something that you can use for texturing, but you can also use for riveting. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit this hammer onto our bench block. And for one thing, I'm going to keep my fingers away from the head, and I'm going to try to be careful. And so I don't accidentally hit the camera. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through it first, and then I'm going to do it. So I'm going to take my piece and I'm going to move the metal. So this is ergonomically, you don't want to put your finger here because that vibration will travel right up here and live in here. And you're going to have, this will, maybe it won't hurt today, maybe it don't hurt tomorrow, but it adds up. And if you have arthritis or joint pains, that's cumulative. So you don't want to choke your hammer, because if you hold it up here and try to hammer it, you're not going to get the full swing and the benefit of the hammer. So hold it down close to the bottom and hold it comfortably. Whenever you're hammering things, you also don't want to squeeze too tight, because you can mess up your control. Somebody said it's kind of like a firm handshake, like not bone crushing like some of them people, but a firm, good handshake. So you're holding on to it. It's not going to fly out your hand, but it's also, you're not gripping it for dear life, because that can be bad for your ergonomics, especially if you're going to be doing a lot of texturing. So, with our motions, we're going to start in the middle and work our way down. And then we're going to go from the middle and work our way up. All right. In theory, you can go like this, but what that's going to do is we're doing whenever I'll get the diagrams, y'all. So there's two parts of this hammer. There's this flat end and this wedge shape. Now, when you hit the metal surface with a wedge shape, it's forcing the metal outwards. All right. You're going to create an impression and it's going to push the metal outwards like this. Now, if you hit it with a piece of metal with a flat end like this, it's going to do what's called a compression blow. So it's going to tighten up this way because all the force is going down. All right. And you may be able to get a kind of a hammer texture because you're basically planishing the metal with the flat end of this hammer. So that's the planishing end of it. It's that kind of flat, smooth end. And generally, if you're going to have a planishing hammer, this is a planishing hammer. This side is, you want to keep that super clean and not marred up. So this is one of my better hammers. So I don't use it for things that it's not supposed to be used for. And I'll show you one of my junky hammers in a second. All right, so whenever you're hitting with a wedge shape, it's pushing the metal out. So if you start on one end and you go down, you're gonna create like this weird fan shape, which is kind of cool, you know, if you want to make it even more fan shaped than it is. But when we're doing it from the middle and going outwards, we're pushing the metal, we're flaring it out gently this way. And then we're going to flare it out and push it gently this way. We don't want to make too much of a curve, but we also don't want to, we want to do it so it's more even. All right. So I'm going to start in the middle, go towards the middle of my bench block, positioned over the leg. Now, notice I was going up and down, and I'm not hitting too hard, but you can see already, I'll hold this flat. You can see already how that's changing the shape of it a little bit. And this is for ergonomics as well, is you want to have repetition of motion. You also want to keep your elbow close to your body, not hanging out wavy gravy style, but you have more control when it's close to your body, when you're resting it against your body, and you're just moving the metal and not necessarily the hammer. And right now I'm doing kind of an aesthetic thing where I'm just going in towards the edge and kind of creating that kind of crinkled. And I'm doing kind of gentle motions. So I'm going to show this to you so you can see both of these versions. All right. So you can see the difference between plain, which is fine, but adding texture adds a lot of character and it looks a lot more like the leaf because the leaves they grow, they have those kind of radial lines coming out of it. Now, if I wanted to, I could texture this as well. I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'm going to keep that focus there. Now, if you don't have one of these hammers, um, and and you want to add a texture, um, what you can do also is I have a piece of steel wire. Now, it's important that you use steel wire for this. So I've got two kinds of steel wire. This is a little bit of a thicker gauge steel wire. I'm guessing maybe 18 gauge. Um, and you'll want that to be as flat as possible. Um, and one thing is if you have two steel bench blocks, you can roll it like this against each other with a wire in the middle, and it will straighten out your wire. So if you don't have any nylon jaws or whatever pliers, you can use that. So I'm just going to create this, and this is the way um, that you can texture metal, um, and this is what I was talking about ideas that you can take and make your own. So if you wanted to have a texture and you want it to be a swirl, for example, they don't necessarily make swirl texture hammers. I mean, they might, but sometimes it's hard to find exactly what you want. But if you take a steel wire and you shape it into that swirl, whenever you go and use that, you can use that to texture softer metal. Now, if you do this, you can't do steel on steel because it's not going to work. Um, you can do this steel on copper, annealed copper, and you can get this to work. But if you try to do other metals, it may not work. It also is important that the metal is annealed. It's super important. Now, if you don't have steel, you can use brass, but you just won't get as many hits out of it as if you use steel. Because steel is harder than brass, but brass is harder than annealed copper. So it's kind of you have to think about what is the hardest of the metals, and you use that as your texturing device. Now you will put this hammer away. You're not going to use this hammer. You're not going to use a fancy hammer. You're going to put this away. Say bye-bye. Because this is a planishing end and you want that to be super smooth, and you do not want to mark up your nice hammer, because if you mark up your nice hammer, then you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to sand it and buff it and polish it and do all this other jazz to make it nice again. So I have an inexpensive hammer, and this is a ball peen hammer, and it's a cheapy deepy hammer. Um, and you can see this hammer has gotten its own texture. It's got a lot of use. It's not a fancy hammer. This one, if I hit the raw metal, that texture is going to do what's called telegraph onto this piece of metal. So I don't necessarily want to do that. I want to impart this texture onto the leaf. All right. Now I also have this thinner steel wire, and it's called baling wire. And this is what you use. Like if you have something that you're soldering, you sometimes people will wrap a piece of this around and tighten it up so that the pieces, if they're kind of big or whatever, they won't try to come apart. But the cool thing about this is with this, with the technique that we did with the riveting hammer side, you pretty much have one line weight. Um, and you can get a little bit of a deeper and wider line weight by hitting harder, but you're also thinning out your metal that way. So, so with this technique, if you depending on how thick your wire is and what gauge your steel wire is, you can change up what your line weight is. So if you wanted to do some thick lines, you can do thick lines, you can do thin lines, you can do a whole mixture of different line weights. Now, the reason why I'm showing this to you is that this is steel wire is very inexpensive. It's readily available at hardware stores. And if you get a cheapy deepy hammer, I mean, you can use like a regular hammer, and since it's not a fancy hammer, you don't have to worry about marring it up. Very inexpensive. So all you need is a blank and some steel wire and a hammer. And the secret ingredient on this one is some painter's tape. Now, painter's tape is really important because, for one, it's not going to stick and stay on your bench block forever and all eternity. Some tape, if you put it on, you're going to get a residue and it's going to be a nightmare, and your bench block's going to be sticky. And I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it's just one more step of where you have to clean this up. With painter's tape, you can put it down, pick it up, move it around, and it's going to stay sticky, but it's not going to make your bench block sticky. It's not going to make your metal sticky. Um, the other thing that this is really good about um, is that it's really inexpensive, it's readily accessible, and yeah. All right, so I'm just going to take a piece of this painter's tape off. Now, if you had a very fancy design and say you spent time like making your initials out of wire, you would take that and put this straight down and tape this directly onto your metal. And then that way it won't move. So you can hammer it and it's not going to move around. For our project, we only really need one side of it stuck down, right? And then I'm going to get this out of the way. And then we're going to take our cheapy deepy hammer and we're going to focus on the wire. So hitting the wire, moving your piece. Now, after a while, even the steel will start smashing and compressing. So you kind of have to adjust this. If you're starting to lose your definition, you're going to have to adjust this so that you have a fresh part of that wire. Because you're basically flattening the wire then, on the top at least. All right. So it's doing that line texture, and you're using this cheapy deepy hammer, and you're getting those marks that way. Now I'm going to switch this out for a piece of thinner wire. Now also, when you're using cutting steel wire, do not use your good precision cut pliers. Use those cheap uh wire cutters that they sell at the hardware store, because if you cut this steel wire with this cutter, you're going to notch this up and it's going to be like a gappy tooth smile. It's not, it's going to get ruined real quick, and then eventually that's going to be no good and you're not going to be able to use this for anything. It's going to, unless you like file it down or do something. So you can use, for this kind of wire, you can use, for this is probably 24 gauge, 20s, maybe even 26 gauge wire. I think this is 24 gauge. Um, for this wire, you can use memory wire cutters. Now, I'm going to tell you what's the difference. So this cutter is different. Um, with memory wire cutters, they have two kind of pieces like this. And here's the hinge that comes down like this. All right. So this is what a close-up of the memory wire looks like. And you'll notice if you look real close to the memory wire, it's thick. Um, it's not like this cutter. With these cutters, you're only cutting with this very thin edge. And so they grind the edge down so it's like this. And the metal gets sheared this way, where the cutters come and they meet in this one point. That's how they cut. But with the memory wire cutters and cutters like this, how they work is there's, it's like the two pieces, kind of like how I was showing the pancake die. But when you have the wire, it gets a shearing action. This is called shearing. And it shears the metal as opposed to cutting it. So it does rely on those two ends kind of meeting up and crossing, and then it kind of almost it precisely breaks the wire basically. Whereas this is the cutting motion, this is a shearing motion. So that's why it's important to have that. Also, this is usually tool steel, which is a harder steel than some of the softer steel. Some of the other steel has to be, it's tool steel, but they'll do where they only harden just the edge so that the edge is super hard, but the other part will be softer. And I could go into that, but it's a whole other ball of wax. But anyway, so I got this shape here, and I have this thin binding wire. And I'm going to tape this down, and I'm going to use this to texture the metal. One thing I will say is the thinner the wire, the quicker it becomes. It will actually cut your tape. See how it cut the tape where it hit? Um, and so if you were really, so if you wanted to do a pattern, if you wanted to have a squiggly line in there, you would shape your wire to be like that. And then you put it onto your piece, and then you tape it down and then hammer it. and that will impress into your piece. This is a way that with some of the metal, they call this a scoring. And what that's useful for is if you're doing fold forming and you need to do fold forming on a curve, is you'll take your wire and you can use that to score your metal. Now, one reason why we're taping it down is because if you hold it and this is a thicker wire, you can pinch yourself. And so it's easier if you have the wire held down with the tape, because you're not going to get necessarily pinched up. I mean, you can, with this one, if you bend it up and you kind of create a little handle for yourself, so your finger's not underneath there, then you can kind of, manipulate it. But I think holding it stationary frees up your hand to move the metal a little bit easier. And this is the look. All right. So you're still getting those lines, but it's a different way of creating those lines. All right. So this is a very inexpensive way of creating texture on metal. And you can take this and modify it if you want to, or you can get a hammer and you can get that kind of a different texture. All right. So those are the two different kind of ways that you can texture your annealed copper ginkgo leaf blanks. And you can do this, you can do a lot with, combining. Like if you wanted to, you can go and you can come in here and do some stuff also. So say you wanted to make a line that was really in the middle there, like a biloba. They call it ginkgo biloba because it's kind of the leaves are lobed. So if you wanted to combine it, you can do that. So this is the hammered, and then you can see I scored that line down the middle. I don't actually like that, but also one of the things you can notice is that the metal is moving. So if you wanted to, you can really work. Um, and if you come on the edge and you do that, you can change the shape working on the edge of this piece. You can start creating undulations in your metal. So you're thinning out areas like right here, and then you're pushing the metal outwards. So if you wanted to, you can definitely come in here and take the flat end and go in here and create those ripples and work off the edge. You can also take pliers. Now, if you work with this and you add all this texture, you're not going to necessarily be able to manipulate the metal as much now. So keep that in mind. If you want to create big folds and ruffles in it, you're going to have to anneal this again. So if you don't have a torch, then you're not going to be able to anneal your metal. So what I was talking about is if you annealed this and then you took your round nose pliers and then you crimp it and do that, you can create kind of a ruffle where the leaf is like this. So if I'm making like a rose petal leaf, sometimes what I'll do is you take the metal and you start hitting it and you radiate your blows like this. So it spreads the metal outward like this. And then if you focus on the edge, you and your blows on the edge and you kind of work it so that you create that undulation, you can create almost like this looks so that when you have it, it kind of cups in like that. All right. So there you go. Bonnie says more tools I have to have. If you saw the earlier part where I talk about accessibility, all you need is a junky hammer, steel wire, and some tape. And you can use any hammer, and even the hammer that you use to do your, hang a picture. So you can get all of this stuff. If you go to like a yard sale, you can get all this stuff for less than, $5 maybe. So if you don't have it already, and you don't need a lot of wire. But what I will say is that once you've hammered this steel wire, just cut that off and recycle it, because once you've hammered this, it's not really good for anything else. You've already kind of used it for adding texture, and you're work hardening it when you're hammering it. So it's not really good anymore. And you can see it. It's if you look in the light, you can see how it's got those hammer marks in it. That means that it's super brittle at this point. All right. So the next thing you can do is punch the holes. So there's a couple different ways that you can punch the holes. If you have the tools, I'm not at my studio, so I don't have this. Um, is you take a thing it's called a center punch, and it's basically, it looks like a scribe, and you put this over it like this, and then you just gently tap it, and it will create a divot. And then you take your divot and you go to your Fordham or your drill press, and you use it, and you just zip, and you drill a hole real fast and easy. Um, that's one way that you can drill a hole in your piece. Um, now, another way that you can do this, and this is going to require a little bit of extra cleanup, is you can take a nail and gently position it, make that center divot mark, pull the nail up, put it back in, and lightly hammer it until you push it through. Now, it will create a huge burr on the back, and you will have to file and sand that down so it's not going to cut anybody. Um, or the other option is a handheld hole puncher that you can use. It basically looks kind of like this, but instead it's got a little piece of metal, and it's like a tube, and then there's a little divot, and you can just push it. It's like a hole puncher. It is a hole puncher. Um, but before I go too far, well, I'll just do one at a time. Um, Now, the option I'm going to show you today is using a twisting hole punch. Now, this version, this crafted findings, is a little bit expensive. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to put this back over here since we're kind of done over in that section. I can, instead of being like perched on my side and then like around the camera. So this is a little bit expensive. This is a riveting, a crafted findings. These are, I think they're like $70. They do sell other versions, but they are not as good, uh, usually. I mean, sometimes you can find it. But now, one thing I will recommend is, if you haven't seen these before, these are called identi pens. And these are usually what you would sign the back of like a license or an identification card. They're wonderful. They're like Sharpie on steroids. They're really wonderful. They have two tips in them. There's a wider tip, and then there's a finer tip. It's super important that whenever you're planning your holes for your piece, you will get your pen and you mark them out so that you can plan it, so that you know where you're going to add your hole. I know I'm going to want to have a hole here for my ear wire, and I know that I want to have, maybe I'll have one here at this lower point, I'll have one here. Maybe I'll have one here, and then I'll have maybe one in. Basically, I'm doing polka dots all over the place. I'm not going to worry about going up here because if I have something dangle down from there, it's going to look kind of weird. So I'm going to focus mostly towards the bottom. I like odd numbers, so I've done 5 of them. And then I focus mostly on the tip, the kind of the tips of these lobe shapes. Now, the other thing that I'm going to also try to do is not put them way far back because then that means I need a bigger jump ring to get in there. So I don't want them to be super inside because then I have to use a great big jump ring, which if you want to do that for aesthetics, you can definitely do that, but I don't want to use a super huge jump ring. So I'm going to keep this close to the edge of my metal. But the other thing is I don't want that so close to the edge of the metal that it's like hanging on by a hair, y'all. I want there to be at least 1 or 2 millimeters between the edge and where I make my hole. Because if you put it too close to the edge, you can very easily punch through and create a problem. Now, one thing that we're going to talk about in a second is cleaning up this edge. And you should be very careful because sometimes when you're adding this texture, you can be creating almost like a serrated blade on this edge because you're making it sharp, you're making some parts thinner, you're making some parts thicker, and it can cut you. So just be careful about this. You don't want to rub your finger real aggressively because you're going to end up getting the problem times, and no one wants the blood time for the project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my screw punch and I'm going to um, line it up over the hole. And I don't know if you can see that. I've lined it up over the hole and I'm going to twist this. And you're going to feel it come through. But one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to twist it so that this point goes all the way down. And the reason why I don't want to do that is because if you keep cranking until you get to here and here, you're going to be pushing the metal into that hole. So you're going to have a really big burr to clean up on this side. And also this part will sometimes scuff up and texture your hole on this side. So you don't necessarily want to do that. And then when you feel as though you've gone through the metal, see how there's a hole there? There is still a little bit of a burr on this, so we will have to clean that up. But we're just going to go over this and twist it. And we're going to do this like that. Bonnie asked, the ginkgo is my favorite leaf. I'm so excited. Are you guys going to sell these cutouts? If people want them, we'll sell them. But if people don't want them, then no. But we're talking about making a kit. I know you don't like a kit, so we're thinking about it. But the thing is I don't want to have the website like bogged down with like a million made to order things. I just want to be able to have an afternoon where I know I'm going to make this many of them and make them and finish them, as opposed to having like a gajillion different shapes that we have to jump up and do, because then that's going to add one more chore to my list. So I've got these, I'm punching the holes, and then the next thing I'm going to do is, and I'm making sure I'm going to hold this stationary so it's not wobbling around, because you can break your piece if it's all wobbling around. It's basically a thing about leverage, and this metal is pretty thin, so I don't want to break it. So I'm holding this stationary while I'm twisting it. and that's going to be the way that I punch a hole through that. And this is really handy. I use this before I got a Fordham and really kind of upped my game. I use this all the time. I use this all the time, and sometimes the little twist part will break, and you have to get a replacement. But generally speaking, if you use this 24 gauge metal, you can use this all day long, and you'll be able to punch thousands of holes with it, and they're still nice and clean. So, you know, this is a good investment, y'all. Get a good one, and it will last you a long time. If you're going to a place where you don't have electricity, these are super handy. Um, and then at the end, sometimes you just tap it out, and then you have these little nuggets of the pressed out metal. You just want to make sure that that's not going to end up anywhere. All right. So one thing we're going to have to do, and no matter what we do, we're going to have to do this, is clean up. And you can get one of these. These are Swiss pattern needle files. These are super handy dandy. I use them all the time. They come in different shapes, and they're not too expensive. Like this is a triangle shape, and you can go in if you want to clean that, make that really sharp. You just go in here, and the way that you use a file is you're going to brace one side and you're going to move this. Now, a file cuts on the push, not on the pull. So if you're going to put the energy into it, you're going to. Now, one thing you can a cheat that you can do is if you drink champagne, or if you have a friend that has champagne or wine cork, if you take and you drill a hole in that and you put this into the champagne cork, um, you're less likely to hit yourself with that end, and you can hurt yourself pretty badly if you jam this in there and you can stick that into your hand. It doesn't feel good. So if you want, you can just clean those up, clean the edges up with that. But what I'm going to use is a flat file. And I'm just going to go on the backs here and just lightly go over them. Now, if you want, you can hold this in a ring clamp, and that's another way that you can do this so that you don't accidentally stab yourself. And this is just cleaning up the burrs. And I will go around the edges too, and that will help keep any sharp points down. So I don't want to stab myself. I don't want to stab my whoever buys these or gets these or wears these. So I'm going to clean these edges up, and I'm going to lightly go. If you need, if there's a super deep kind of impression and it's a curved impression that a square file or a triangle file isn't good, they also have these half round files, and these are really good if you need to get into kind of rounded areas and smooth out the edges that way. Now, one thing one of the teachers I had is they are doing a shape that's like this, where the motion is like this, so that you're going over the metal as opposed to going like this, because then you're creating a sharp, and you can use your hand, this hand too, to go in the to help that, and then you flip that over, and you can get where it's nice and smooth. You can do a lot of cleanup with these files. You can also use diamond files; those work great. And you can do patterns in this. So if you wanted to do like, if you have a piece of really thick wire, like if you had like 16 gauge wire or 14 gauge wire or whatever, you can cut little patterns out of here and do all kinds of decorative kind of elements. So it's pretty cool. Some of the bracelets, the Tuareg bracelets that we have in the shop every once in a while. They're done with pieces of thick gauge wire that somebody has taken one of these files and cut patterns in with it. And you can make a really cool kind of crisscrossy shaped, dimensional kind of looks to your piece using just a file and some wire. So you can do things on the edges too. You can create deeper impressions. You can also, if you wanted to, and you are very careful about it, you could create like an edge here. I don't know if you can see that. Do you see those little points of light that I created? If you wanted to create that, you can take your file and use that to create more texture on your leaf here, so that you have even more kind of, it looks more organic and less like it's been pressed out by a machine, or it gives it a little bit of something extra. um, so I don't know if you can see that or not. You can kind of see it where there's like wherever there's a little point of light, that's where it's been filed. All right. So once you have finished up your filing, you can do filing for a decorative element, but for the most part, you want to clean up these burrs on the back from punching holes. Now, once you've done that, you're going to want to take and some sandpaper. And this is 600 grit. And I'm just going to lightly go over this. Over the surface of this. And I'm creating a tooth on this. And I'm also cleaning up where I didn't get any of the filing done. The filing, it can clean up a lot, but the sandpaper is where it's going to be really nice and smooth. So if you have any sharp edges or points, it's going to be cleaning up. Now, it is kind of a pain in the butt. I'm not going to lie. But if you want your pieces to kind of move up to the next level, that's how you do it. You spend a little bit extra time with a file and with the sandpaper. Now, because this has kind of a curve to it, you can't really get it like this. But if you have a super flat surface like this, you can do like a figure eight, or if it's like around. But because we've textured this, it's kind of wavy gravy on the back. So we're basically removing metal, and we're not removing it evenly. So I kind of just hold it and kind of just work it in there, and just keep my hand moving and get it like that. Now, if you wanted to, you can move up. This is 2,500. So it's very, very fine. It's very fine compared to that. You don't necessarily have to do this. 600 is fine. We're going to do another step. But when you're working with sandpaper, you start with the lowest grit first and then work your way up. So if you want this to be like mirror finish, you can get it with sandpaper. You just have to buff it, working your way up to some of the higher grits. And you can see the difference. You can actually polish the metal using sandpaper. One of the other tricks that I love is I love the surface that you get using. This is an automotive abrasive. It's by 3M. It's the maroon or magenta, and you just get this really beautiful matte satin kind of. I love this finish. It's just beautiful to me. I probably should have only done one side. Okay, I'll do it on this side. I'll only do half and then see if you can see the difference. I mean, you can kind of see it. It just makes it all that kind of satin Also, if you go in the direction of your lines, you're going to create that kind of those grooves. See, can you see that? Um, so I'm just going to continue doing this, and I've got this down. And then we're going to move into the next part of the project, which is adding color. I mean, I would be happy just wearing this. Maybe not. If I didn't have, if I wasn't planning to have the dangles and stuff, I would be happy with just this copper like this. Now, if you wanted to leave it raw copper, you can take a little bit of Renaissance wax and lightly buff it with that, and that will keep it from turning because it will oxidize if you don't do something. So that will help protect it and seal this in and keep it from developing a patina. So if you wanted it to be like this and stay like this, that's how you would do that. So this is kind of our second segment of this project. And what I'm going to do is I've got a piece of paper. I've got my favorites, these vintage patina paints. They don't really sell these anymore, but they have a new kind of formula of them. I like the old formula because they're a little bit more saturated. I've got, but you can still find these if you look hard enough. This is called moss. I've got a little bit of agate, which is kind of creamy color, creamy white. I have this ochre yellow, and I have earth, which is a brown color, and I have the matte glaze. So I've got, I've got a lot here, and you don't necessarily need them all. But one of the things that I think is really important is when you're learning to paint, one thing that is really you can tell is when the difference between painting straight out of the tube and mixing the colors. Um, Generally speaking, uh, if I see something that, like, if I see a painting, there's like my first initial impression of the painting, and I like take it in. But the more that I start looking at a painting, I start dissecting it. So the first things that I dissect is composition, and then the next is I start dissecting like materials. And then I start seeing like what the artist used. Did they blend the colors? So I can actually tell if I look at a painting, sometimes if somebody painted straight from the tube and what colors they use. So it's not like a special talent or anything. I don't think. It's something that you can kind of train yourself to recognize, especially if you're using certain colors a lot. You can see, you can tell when somebody painted straight from the tube. And it's not to say that that's necessarily bad. It's just as we refine our practices as artists, we want to be able to increase the mystery, I guess, of how we create the illusions that we're trying to get. So I'm going to squeeze out a little bit of this moss. If you don't have a head pin with you, with your patina paints, I suggest you get one because these holes get plugged up pretty good. I also like to have a paper towel so that I can wipe off my head pin, and you just need a little bit. And then I'm gonna squeeze out a little bit of this moss patina. I'm gonna squeeze out a little bit of this agate, and I'm gonna squeeze out a little bit of this ochre. I'm going to reserve these for later, and you'll see what I mean by that in a second. I've got these crusty brushes. These are my brushes that I use all the time. And I have this water that I probably should put some more water in because basically making some paint down in there, the sludge. And I'm going to use a dry brush that is not wet because if I use a wet brush, it can cause the pigments to curdle. So I'm just going to mix these colors a little bit of that green into the yellow. And I'm going to focus here on the top. And I'm kind of scrubbing this into the surface. And then I'm going to take a little bit of this agate and mix it in and make a lighter color. And I'm going to focus on the edge here. I'm not going to blend the paint yet. I'm going to focus on the edge and creating that. And then I'll go in where it meets and do that kind of blending. And if I wanted to, I could let this dry. I don't want to put too thick of a layer on here. That's another thing. You don't want it too thick. It's better to work in thin layers, and you'll be more successful. Now this brush, if I set this aside, it's going to harden and be useless. So I want to wash this out, but I also want to make sure that if I have any kind of paint that I want to go back in and adjust, I will do it with another dry brush. All right. So this dries extremely quick. But one of the things that will definitely make your patina paints last longer is if you heat set them. So normally I have a heat gun. I don't have my heat gun with me, but we're just going to picture it. I have a hair dryer downstairs, but the heat setting will help bond it to the surface and create that sturdy connection between the surface color and the metal. And because we roughed up the surface with the sandpaper and created that tooth, that's really going to get into the nooks and crannies of the metal on a very small, tiny, minuscule level and kind of grip in there and lock in there. All right. So this is pretty much dry-ish. It would be better to let this dry completely. And I have different options. So once this is dry completely, I can go back over this. I could leave it the way it is, and you get a solid kind of color. Or I can go back in here and take some of this sandpaper. This is not dry yet. I can tell it's not dry yet. I'm going to get my hair dryer real fast. So I will be right back. That didn't take too long. And I'm going to unplug this. Unplug this in. And then I'll zoom back out. Now, when you go to heat set this and you use a heat gun, you do not want to use your fingertips to hold this because you can burn yourself real good. So what I would recommend is to get it put in the oven around 275 or so, 300, something around there, and put it in maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And then you let it cool before you handle it. Now, if you're going to use a heat gun, hold it with your pliers like so, and then use a heat gun. I just used a hair dryer, and already the metal's kind of hot. So if you use a heat gun, that's used to strip paint, and if it can strip paint, it can strip flesh. Um, so just keep that in mind. So I'm gonna get this now that it's dry. I have an option where I can take this, and this is the 600 grit sandpaper, and I can lightly buff it. And it can bring out some of that texture that we created, because we worked really hard on creating that texture. I don't want to hide it. And I kind of like the kind of dimensional qualities that I can get using the sandpaper. So I'm just going to lightly go over this and buff it with that piece of sandpaper. Now, if you don't have that, you can use one of those little square rectangular emery words. Oh, and then another thing that really helps is if you clean your metal before you paint on it. That also helps because there's kind of metal dust when you are sanding it. Make sure whenever you're sanding things, you're doing it in a relatively well ventilated area, and if you do a lot of sanding, that you wear a mask, and you know you take care of yourself. So the next thing I'm going to do is I have a couple different options. If I wanted this to be an autumn leaf, I could take and put this gold color and mix it with this matte, and then go over this and really make it more kind of a yellow, bring out that real ginkgo color of it. I kind of don't, I want it to be this green kind of greenish yellow, kind of like a new ginkgo leaf as opposed to one of the golden ones. But I love that gold color, so maybe in the fall or for a fall one, I'll do that. But one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to take this matte glaze, and I'm going to put a couple. I'm not going to use a ton because I hate to waste. Um, and so I'm going to get this earth color, which is a brown color. I'm going to put just one drop of this to maybe 2 drops of the matte glaze. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, I'm going to mix it up nice and thoroughly, and basically making an antiquing glaze. So I've got this piece, and I'm just going to paint the whole thing with this brown antiquing glaze. And I'm going to really work it so that it gets into the nooks and the crannies and get all into those kind of crevices. I want to make sure that I'm really getting in those crevices. Um, and I don't want to go too thick, and I don't want to go too thin. So you kind of have to get it just right. And then I'm kind of dragging my feet a little bit, not too much, but I'm gonna drag my feet a little bit so that it's drying just a little bit. I don't want to wipe it off too soon because it could, if I just wipe it off right now, it could wipe all of it off, and it's not going to necessarily get into those crooks and crannies. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my finger and I'm basically going to wrap it with the tissue, the paper towel, so that it's a smooth surface on this. And I'm just going to go against the grain. I'm wiping against the grain here. And the reason why I'm going against the grain as opposed to with the grain is that if you go against the grain, it's going to leave the paint in the recessed areas. Now, whenever you add new paint to this old surface, it kind of wakes up the previous layers. All right. So you can wipe away. It's a wet technique of wiping away the surface. Now, if you really wanted to, and you wanted more of the metal to show, you could take a alcohol soaked wet wipe and wipe it completely, and just like buff the heck out of it. And the color will only be in that kind of recessed area. Now, if you wanted to, if say you wipe too much away, you kind of have to start over. I mean, you can kind of add some more in there, but at this point, you're pretty much, you know, you're gonna have to dance with the partner you got because it's not gonna, I mean, this paint is pretty much dry. And I'm just like lightly dry brushing it. But that's one way that you can kind of, I guess you can go back over it if there's any areas that you'd want to revisit. And then you can build up layers using that, the glaze. If you want to build up layers, you can mix them and get in there and really kind of have a beautiful kind of variegation of colors. If you want those subtle colors, that's how you get it. Is you build up layers, thin, translucent layers, and that's how you get that kind of effect of the illusion of like of a natural element as you build up layers. So that's how you get that color. I'm gonna kind of go back in here and do a little bit more on that tip here. And I kind of like that. All right. So I'm just gonna hit this with a hair dryer real quick. It's nice and on there. If I wasn't on camera and doing a demo, I would set this in the oven and or hit it with a heat gun and let that really heat set on there. Um, but in the meantime, I'm just gonna lightly buff the edge so we get a little bit of that color come through. Now, if I wanted to, I can also mix my patinas. So, or mix my surface treatment with color. So if I wanted to, if I didn't like that bright coppery color on here, that metallic hue, what I could do is after I've layered my colors on here with the patina paint, this is basically a paint. It's not a real patina. A patina, a real patina is a chemical reaction between a metal surface and a chemical. So a lot of times it's acid or something like that. And that reaction between the metal and the chemical creates that other color. That's a real patina. Um, or oxygen will oxidize things and turn things black, turn silver kind of that dark kind of black color. There are different things that you can use to speed up or create more patina. And one of those things is liver of sulfur. And if you don't like that bright, shiny copper color, which I like because I think it adds to that kind of that that richness, is you can go in and you can dunk this in you either dissolve a chunk because it comes in two different forms. It comes in a chunk form and a gel form. So you dissolve that in warm water and then you dunk that in there. And wherever there's exposed metal, it will react with the liver of sulfur. And so you take it out, clean it, neutralize it with some water and baking soda, wash it with some warm soapy water. You don't want to scrub it super hard and then do it again and maybe even again, repeat that process again and again if you want it to be really dark and black and velvety. Um, one of the most common problems with adding patina to metal is people think that if you take and you do liver of sulfur and you just hold it in for a really long time, that that's going to be the way to do it. But just like how we're adding color in very fine layers, if you do that, what's going to happen is it's going to get thick, and it's also going to turn like this battleship gray color. It's not going to be a real dark black color. It's going to be like a battleship gray, and it can flake off and be patchy. So the reason why we're doing that is cleaning in between dipping is because it will create a more uniform, even, and darker and rich layer of patination of that. That's if you wanted that to be black. I'm not doing that right now. I like that kind of peak of copper and that metallic sheen in there. So I'm not going to mess with that. But that's another technique of that you can add color to your piece, right? Rana says, if you buy a sheet of 24 gauge copper, will it have been annealed? How can you determine if it has been annealed? So when you get copper, one of the things that it will generally say is if it's dead soft, half hard, or full hard. And so one of the things that they do is that through the processes of cutting or manipulating the sheet metal, it can work hard in the metal. So generally, if they punch out a shape, it's going to become half hard because the force that we're doing to cut the shape out, it makes it harder, makes it more rigid. So that's pretty much like half hard. So you can, if you need it to be annealed, you can feel it when you can feel if something is what this state is. I mean, you can't like I don't know, my fingers aren't that sensitive to know, but you can kind of, if it bends, that means it's still dead soft and it's still annealed. You can bend copper with your fingertips and move it and manipulate it almost like paper if it's fully annealed. Um, if it's hard, it's gonna be stiff and you're not gonna be able to bend it. So there you go. All right. So now that I have my color on there and I'm happy with it, I'm gonna make sure that my lids are closed on my patina paints because I don't want them to dry out. And a little goes a long way. If I wanted to, I probably could have done the pair of earrings. And I do recommend, if you if you're making a matching pair of earrings, do them at the same time. Repeat the process. If you add the color here at the top, add the color here at the top. If you add the color at the bottom, add the color at the bottom. And just do exactly the same thing at the same time. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to duplicate the process exactly. So you have a window that you can make them kind of the same. Otherwise, you just have to be really good at then mixing and matching and trying to get them to look exactly the same. So what I recommend, if I want something to be super exact, um, and not be like, if I want things to be more exact, I will work on them at the same time, and then that way they will match. Otherwise, you may have one that's a little bit more green and one more yellow and one that's a little bit more brown, or one that has a little bit more copper revealed. So just do them at the same time and work in between back and forth, and you can have it to be where it matches. Now, if you don't do that, and for some reason, um, you can go back and I mean, it's not going to be, there's only so many colors you can get out of the paint tubes. So So they'll be relatively close, and if they're a slightly off, it's not the end of the world because if we're inspired by nature, nature, there's 1,000 shades of green on a tree. There's 1,000 shades of that kind of yellow color. So it's if they're slightly off, it's not going to be too bad. And also, if they're that close to your face, then it's too close. They need to back up. Now, if you have it and if it's really noticeable, if it's way noticeable, like one is clearly yellow and one's clearly green, then I would recommend really just making them different. So if they're really different looking or if they're different enough that you can tell that they're not the same, then make one really yellow and make one really brown or do some things that if they look weird, play up that weirdness so that it looks like it's intentional as opposed to an accident. It's all about how you can kind of make it so it plays to your favor. You can manipulate the elements so that it does what you want and makes it look the way you want it. Karen says, Andrew, you are so inspiring, and I thank you for sharing your knowledge. Well, thank you for watching and hanging out. Um, Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I've got some jump rings, and these are 18 gauge, 6 millimeter jump rings. I'm going to take these and open them up. One side stationary, one side not, and I'm going to need 6 of them. And I'm just going to open these jump rings up. And one of the things why I'm doing it this way as opposed to adding my head pins directly on this is there's 2 reasons. One reason is adding these jump rings is an extra point of connection. So you'll have more movement in your piece and it will dangle more freely. Just imagine it like a doll. If you have more joints, it's going to have a more sinuous movement. But if you have no joints and it's all just one leg, it's gonna look, it's gonna have that look of, be stiff-legged, which is not necessarily a bad thing, if that's the look you're going through. The other thing is that if I change my mind about something and I have a jump ring on there, it's way easier to open and close a jump ring as opposed to cutting off a piece of metal and starting over. Now, if you solder the jump rings, which I would not recommend with this because um, you can do it if you're really careful, but the problem is that if yeah, this paint can catch on fire. So um, if you put it to a direct flame, I believe it's an alcohol base to it, and it will flash um, with the flame. So just I don't know. I think it's an extra step, and it's not necessarily you're not if you know how to open close a jump ring properly, your point of connection will be, or your where the jump rings meet, the 2 ends of it meet, is going to be so tight that you won't be able to get it. And also, in theory, it's not going to be where you're not swinging from the chandelier and having to put all this weight on it, and it's not like a chain that's going to save your life. So I don't think you necessarily need to have it be a soldered jump ring, soldered shut. Because if you solder them shut, I mean, that's nice, but you know, you can mess up your patina and your paint job, and you can do a lot of different things to it. Now I'm using 2 pliers because my hands are not that strong in the way that um, I want them to, the metal is stronger than my fingers. So I've got these like that. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is I have some check glass. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I've got these check glass beads that I love. And I'm gonna get my head pins. And whenever you're adding beads onto a head pin, one of the first things you're going to do is check it to make sure it doesn't pull off and that the hole is too big for your piece. If it is, it's not the end of the world. You just put a spacer in there or a smaller bead, and that will help. So I'm just going to repeat that, put these all on there. And string these up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create wire wrap link or dangles for each of these. And I'm going to take my round nose pliers. I'm going to go up about 1/2 inch to 1/4 of an inch, bend them over. More like 1/2 inch. If you need all of the loops to be the same size, you can put a little a Sharpie marker onto your piece, and that will make sure that all of the loops are the same size, because if you make your loop closer to the tip, it will be smaller. If you make your loop closer to your hands, it will be larger. So all of my loops are going to all be relatively this size. So I'm just going to wrap this around. It's going to make a little karate chop. And then I'm going to take my finger and bend it so it's at a 90-degree angle. Now, this is not how a lot of people wire wrap. I know this. But this is the way that I do it. One thing that the way, if you do it my way, is if you have to do it with enough pressure that you hold the wire perpendicular to the mandrels of your round nose pliers, and also that you don't squeeze too deeply, because if you squeeze too deeply, this this mandrel on your round nose pliers is going to dent and ding up the top of your wire. So gentle yet firm, and you won't ding up your wire that way. Kathleen says, this is a great tutorial I've learned by doing, and would have shortened the learning curve if I saw this first. Oh, good. I'm glad when our tutorials are useful. For a long time, I was self-taught for a lot of things. I went to school at the School of Visual Arts, and I learned about painting and mixed media and different things like that. But a lot of the jewelry stuff, I learned myself, or I learned from my sisters. And that's how I learned. I didn't take classes for a really long time, which I kind of regret, but I didn't have the money at the time. So, and they didn't really have YouTube, and you learn from books, or if you have classes, if you were lucky enough to have like a bead store near you, um, you can do that if you had that as a resource. Um, but a lot of times I didn't have money for that. So I learned on my own. And yeah. So one thing that I should mention is that on Fridays we do have make and takes. So you can go, and Jen, she's our teacher at the shop, and you can do different projects with her. So and you only pay for your materials, And that's if you come into the shop, that's one way that you can do it. So I did not close these loops up. There is a an idea that you can close up your loops first, your wire wrap dangles, and then go into it and open and close the jump rings. You can definitely do that if you want to. For me, I like to just do it so that I can just do it this way. This kind of order of operation makes sense to me in my brain. But if it makes more sense to you to do all the wire wrap dangles first, definitely do that and then just open and close the jump rings and attach it that way. So before I get and close this up completely, you can notice that this is coming off to the side. So I'm going to take the very tip of these pliers and turn this inward towards the loop. So it's kind of spiraling in so that when I close this up, it's going to nestle in there nice and good, and I'm not going to have a bunch of issues. Ronnie says, "Thank you for sharing, Andrew. You have a wealth of information. I always learn something new." Oh, good. And Kathleen says, "I've always had more time than money and had a few extra supplies were sacrificed. However, trial and error often has great outcomes too." I think it's also good, like, I don't regret it necessarily that I worked with what I had at the time. When I left art school, I had a ton of student loans. So I really didn't have a lot of extra money to do stuff. So if I wanted to do it at that time, I kind of had to do the trial and error way. I think, though, one of the things is it's even if it doesn't work out, um, I think this is a life lesson too. If something doesn't work out, it's not the end of the story. You can learn from your mistakes. So you can learn about materiality a lot easier that way too. Sometimes you do have to make those sacrifices and you have to murder your darlings, and you get a better material understanding of the material, because you know what happens if you heat it up too much, or you know what happens if if something um if you bend the wire too much, you know what happens. you know you're training your muscles and creating muscle memory. And so I think that that's super important to get that. Sometimes it's easier if somebody else makes all the mistakes first. I'm not going to knock it, because I think there's something to be said about, having knowledge and being able to pass that knowledge down. But I will say that sometimes it's better to learn hands on. If somebody else makes the mistakes, you know, good, I guess. I don't know. But if you do mess up, it's not the end of the world. And I always like to put things into perspective. These are beads, and although they are very important and I like them, and I love beads, um, it's not a liver transplant. It's not, nobody's going to die if I mess up these project, my project. So I kind of think of it as like, what can I learn? What can I glean from this? Is it enjoyment? Is it fun? Um, I don't like to stress out about stuff like this. Like, I know some people, they get really anxious about messing up or not doing it the right way, or if something's going to be ugly, or if something, if it's not going to, if they get too caught up in their heads. I think for me, if I make it, it's nice. If I don't like it, I can take it apart. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to determine the rest of my life if I make a bad pair of earrings. It's always nice when it does work out, but it's one of those things where I think sometimes we get in our own way. And when I was fresh out of art school, I used to agonize continuously about whether or not my work that I made was important enough, or if my work was good enough. And I had all these professors in the back of my head telling, I was, they kind of took up residence in the back of my mind where they were, they kind of took up space in my head rent free. And, that's nice and all that. But sometimes you just need to get out of your own way and make stuff. And so I struggled a lot when I first left art school because I was like, oh, is this important enough? Is somebody going to remember me? Is this good? Is this great? Will I, and that's not necessarily always very productive. So for me, what is better to do in my mind is just to make work and then not worry about it. Somebody else can worry about if it's good or not when I'm dead. Um, so yeah. Um, I see a couple things. Michelle says, I have never took a class, started beading by friends and family, then books. Even a nurse taught me something. Um, then started watching YouTube, and after that, I let my imagination take off. Teresa says, thank you, Andrew. I learned a lot. Julie says, some of my best pieces come from mistakes. And Kathleen says, I took a few pottery classes from a British potter. She emphasized keep your first one of anything new and try. It's best to measure growth. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's one of those things where when I was younger, I was always worried about stuff like that. And if I didn't like something, I would get rid of it. And I still sometimes feel like that. So, but I think it's important to be able to have that, to know and be able to, um, be able to see your growth. I also don't recommend people selling stuff that they make in a class. And one of the reasons why is because I feel like we're all kind of, that's when you're learning. And I know that sometimes that can be frustrating, especially if you make something really cool in a class. But, that's just my philosophy. Sometimes, economics, they speak pretty loudly and you have to do. So what I did here is I added a little solder jump ring to that piece there. And I'm doing a little bit of a mixed metal thing where I'm using some bright tones and I'm using some darker patina tones. And I even have some antique brass in here. And I put that on backwards. So these are leverback earrings, and I love leverback earrings because they are so lovingly utilitarian. You rarely, if ever, do people lose leverback earrings. So, and the ones that I get have these little loops on there, and you can just open them up and close them up and slip them on, and then you're done. Now, if I wanted to make these a little bit longer, another option that I could do as a variation is take and add some wire and maybe put this like this. So Bonnie says originality has been my struggle. I think also the more you do stuff, the more you develop your style. And you know uh you put your I think a lot of times there's this pressure to become, create masterpieces and to be wholly and exclusively your own. However, I think that a part of the human experience is one where we are not necessarily islands. We are kind of archipelagos. We're all connected. We are filters. As artists, I feel like our job is to be a chronicler of the world and the times that we live in. So we don't live in a bubble. We exist with beautiful connections to people in the world around us. So I think it's one thing if you straight up copy somebody and your intent is to copy somebody and to make it look like theirs and be indistinguishable from their work. I think there's another thing from learning from somebody else and maybe doing something in their method or their technique or their style, and then bringing to it what makes you you. So, like I worked with an artist named Tanya Crane, and she showed us this technique of sgraffito. And for me, I didn't want to copy her work directly the way that she makes it. I think that that would be weird. But I do like the idea of taking what she showed us and then build on that and take those ideas and make it my own. So with her stuff, she does a lot of like geometric patterns and line work and mark making. So I do pay homage to that in the sense that I'll include little things, and I think that it's kind of like my inside like history of where it's like the lineage of where that technique came from. So you can tell that she was my teacher. It's like you can tell that Giotto was this student of Cimabue. There you can tell that certain people worked under certain other people and that they learned from them. But then I take my stuff and make it more figural and play with elements of fantasy and magical realism. So it's all about building upon that and kind of making that, making it your own. So I don't know. I'm torn between leaving it like this. I kind of like it like this, but then I also like that razzle dazzle of adding that bead there. So we'll see. All right. So I'm not going to repeat this whole step all over for the matching one of this. But I will do that off camera so that you can see that. I've seen a couple people say that they're interested in a kit. Um, if you are interested in a kit, I can work on making a small number of those kits and I will put them up. I'll maybe make like maybe 10, 10 or so of them. And if they sell out, then I'll consider making more. Or if people want more, I might do that. But I don't want to make like 100 of them and then them sit in the shop and then I'm stuck with a gajillion ginkgo leaf kits. So I'll ask William about that. Norma says, yes, interested in a kit also. Oh, good. And Bonnie said, good advice. I mean, there's a lot that we can do as artists. And I think one of the things that we have to realize is, and some of us don't realize this, but we've already taken the first step. We are manifestors and we are makers. We are taking something, an idea that wasn't solid or physical before, and we're moving that from our head through our heart, through our hands, and creating something. We are makers of our reality and we have control and we have autonomy, in a world that oftentimes we feel powerless or like we don't have control or that we're subject to what others want. In this small way, we have control of the universe. We can make our own universes. We can craft our own realities. And I think that that's one of those things where once you realize that, it's very empowering. And once you realize that you are empowered and you have control over things, then you can start harnessing and channeling and manipulating that creative force, and you can kind of better understand it and what you need to do to honor your muse and guide your creativity. So, like, one of the things that I like to do, especially whenever I'm taking a class or a symposium, is I have my idea book, and I don't know if I can share. I'll briefly peek in there, but I have personal notes in there too, and my to do list of what I need to do. But I have an idea book, and I'll write ideas down as I go, because one of the things that I realize is that even though I feel creative all the time, one of the things is that uh, it's hard to be on all the time. It's hard to be a product inventor all the time. It's hard to be a color theorist all the time. It's hard to be this, that, or the other thing all the time. But when you have it and it's right there, it's striking you, it's the idea is flashing, that light bulb is burning bright and flashing on. One of the things that I like to do is I like to seize it while the iron's hot and write that down in my book. And then whenever I am coming back to a project or whatever I'm when I'm coming back and I need to find inspiration or I need a little bit of direction, I can go through my notes and my idea book and I can say, "Oh, that's a good idea." And I can start building things from those components that I've collected. So I can take those ideas and then go and turn those into things. So somebody asked me one time, "What do you do when you get writer's block or when you get an artist block?" And I said, I don't really ever get that. And the reason why I don't really get that now is because I've trained myself that there's no shortage of ideas. So I will have ideas. Sometimes it takes me years to get to them, and I'll go back to idea books that I've filled up, back in college, and I'll go through them and say, hey, that idea is still a good idea. That still has, it still sparks my curiosity. It still excites me. It still fills me with inspiration. And I'm curious of what that will look like if I make that thing. So then I will take that idea and go and make it. So sometimes it takes a while. Sometimes I have so much stuff and there's so many responsibilities and there's so many different things that I need to do in order to survive. And I don't always have the time to do all the things that I think of. But when I do have that time and I do have that allowance of energy and creativity, I can just go back to my idea books and I can take those ideas. And the other thing, it's like what Kathleen said earlier about saving your first one, is sometimes you'll go back and revisit an idea and it won't resonate the same way as it did originally. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think when that happens, that's a good opportunity to ask yourself why. um, so, for instance, I was really on fire for a certain color, for example, and so I made all this stuff and all these colors, and then when I went revisit that work, I realized that I really wasn't into that color anymore. And when I started looking closer at why I wasn't into that color, I started to understand that my interests in things had changed. So at one point, I was really into crystals, for example, S-word crystals, and I still like them. But for a while, I used to design projects for them and would do like freelance stuff for them and create design competition pieces that were used thousands and thousands of crystals. And so it was all about bling and it was all about kind of like showing off and the extravagance and kind of being, the center of attention and kind of being, seen. And what I realized is that at that point in my life, I had been really repressed and I had been always told to tone myself down. And I had been told, don't be too loud because then people will hate you, or don't draw attention to yourself, because if you draw attention to yourself, then people will pick your faults, and will cast dispersions at you. If you make yourself a target, then people will treat you like that. And so, for a long time, I tried to make myself smaller and more subdue and blend into the background. But in my artistic life, what I was doing is I was crying for attention. I was needing that attention, and I wanted to have that spotlight and that drama of that razzle dazzle of glitter. And you know, once I kind of became all right with myself, and once I kind of learned why I did the things I did and why I felt the way I felt, and actually learned to love myself, I didn't really feel the need to be the razzle dazzle sparkle. I didn't need to be the one at the center of attention. I could work with more subdued color palettes, and I could work with materials that were less blingy. And it's one of those things where when I look back at the work, it seems like somebody else made them. And truth be told, I was somebody else then. We go through our lives shedding different personas and skins, and as we grow through our lives and we mature as artists, we become new again. We reinvent ourselves, and we find ourselves, and there are infinite numbers of who we are as people. And so I think that that's important to realize. We're not fixed in one spot. um, you know for a lot of people, becoming a successful artist, there are a lot of people who will pressure you into conforming to one style, and they will try to make they like to have a label. They like to have a brand where you exist as one thing, because then you become a commodity. You become something that can be sold and recognizably sold. Like, they'll see a piece that you made, and they know you made that piece. And a lot of times people get a lot of pressure to do that. And if something makes money, then they feel pressure to make it again and make it again, when redo it and redo it. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. It can be a slippery slope. um, but I think a more genuine place to come from is to move with what excites you as an artist. And eventually, if you make enough stuff, your abilities and the way that you see the world and the things that interest you will create those bridges amongst those topics. So eventually, people will be able to see that you made it, you made that thing, but that may not be the like a duplicate of the same sweater vest combination in every color. you know they can see the progression, they can see the thing, and they feel, I think people like to feel a part of that journey. They like to see you grow and mature as an artist. They want to see you succeed, and they want to see you grow and develop. So I think that's a good thing to think about when we're talking about being original, and we're talking about how we can harness that creative energy, and how we can build brands as successful artists and as successful business people, but remain true to ourselves and not kind of sell out in that kind of way that oftentimes gets a bad rap. So, anyways, that was probably like 30 minutes of me espousing my truth, truth with y'all. Um, but yeah, and I see that I've kind of just went off on that. Um, Let me see. I see a couple people would be interested uh, in a, in the kits and the leaves. Um, June says, thanks, Andrew. Awesome presentation. Marion says, merci beaucoup. Je vous en prie. Um, Teresa says, I have an idea book too. I would be lost without it. Yeah, I think it's a helpful tool. Michelle says, yes, I have 2 notes that I use and my graph book for my ideas for pattern. Yeah, I think it's really important. I have a couple different ones. I have a bigger one that I can put bigger idea. Like if I draw something out, I like to be able to go as large as I want to go. And I also have a portable one that is good to go. Because for a while I was trying to lug around this big idea book that was great, big and heavy. And I realized subconsciously that I was not carrying it with me because it was a pain in the butt to carry. And so I wasn't necessarily taking, I wasn't really documenting my ideas the way I normally would because of a material block. So I think it's important when you come across one of those blockages that you understand yourself well enough to know what you can do to accommodate that obstacle or that challenge. So if the book is too heavy, then get a smaller book, you know. Like one of the things that I have right now is one of the pens that I use is comes off on my hands and gets super smeary. And so I wasn't really writing in it. So I just had to switch to a different, more indelible pen and I started using it more. So it's one of those things where if you have a challenge and it's affecting you, you can look at the root source of that and make a small modification or a big modification and change it. You know, you have control, you have autonomy. Ronnie says, sometimes I have ideas that I have to wait until I develop the skills to execute them. I think that that is very true. Like I have ideas of things that I can't make yet because I don't know how to do them. And what I like to do is I have things that are kind of aspirational and things that are practical. Things that are practical are the ones that I know rest within my skill set. The things that are more aspirational are things where there are processes or techniques that I don't currently know or haven't developed enough yet, and are things that I can work towards. So if that's the hurdle is the lack of knowledge, then how do I meet that? So I can buy a book, I can watch a YouTube, I can take a class, and I can then develop steps to reach that goal. And you know what? Sometimes you go and you do all those steps, and then you realize that you can do something else. You can do something better. You can do something you couldn't have imagined before you step foot on that process and that creative journey. So I think it's good to have kind of like the business plan, but then it's also good to revisit that business plan and then modify it for where you are when you're looking at it. Bonnie says public scrutiny can stifle innovation. Yeah, I agree. There's a lot of stuff that I don't post because I'm still troubleshooting stuff, and I only let a few people in on that stuff. So I'm constantly making stuff, and there I probably show maybe 10% of what I actually make. Um, and yeah, that's not necessarily the best numbers, but sometimes I can come back over, and sometimes it takes a long time to come back to it to get it to where I want it to be able to share it in public. But sometimes I don't share things, especially when they're in an early stage, because I don't necessarily feel confident in it yet. And sometimes if you put yourself out there, it can be good, but it can also be bad. And sometimes if I'm working through an idea and I put it out there too early, um, somebody's like, "Oh, well, what if you put, this uh, neon yellow running through it?" Um, and uh, and then that's another voice to contend with in my brain. Sometimes it's helpful if I'm stuck and I need help. Having a critique with somebody that you trust is very valuable, and it's a critical way that you can grow as an artist and grow rapidly. um, but number one, not everybody is good at giving critiques. You either fall into the I love it or I hate it, which is useful for developing a critical opinion, but it's also sometimes it's not necessarily useful. And another thing is somebody may not have the skill or background or expertise to be able to give you valuable feedback. So sometimes, you'll be really into, you know, well, an example of this is I really love an artist named Agnes Martin. She is a minimalist artist, and she is very like it's grid pattern, it's very stark, it's very clean, it's painted squares basically. And somebody else did not like her work. And we went to a show, and I was by myself at first. I got there a little bit earlier, and I felt like I had transcended to this cathedral of it was like a meditation, but um, in front of me. I felt like I had stepped out into the desert, and I was soaking up the sun and could breathe this air and could smell this creosote. And even though it had um, nothing representational in the work, there was this sense to it. There was this almost spirituality to it. And then the person came up and they started poo pooing it, and they started talking smack about it. And they're like, "Oh, I hate this. 5-year-old could do this. Who cares about this? Oh, I could do this in my sleep. Oh, this probably took 10 minutes to make. And who wants to look at this? I'm so bored." And I started getting so frustrated, and I just I at one point I just left. I was like, "Okay, let's go." And they're like, "Well, we didn't go through the whole thing." And I was like, "I don't want to go through the whole thing with you." It's like I went and saw this Kandinsky show with somebody, and they were in love with Art Nouveau. And I like Art Nouveau too, but they did not like abstract art. They did not like that. And so we went through this museum, and they complained nonstop. And I thought I was about to throw myself off a bridge because I couldn't enjoy these things that I had admired for years and years and waited all my adult life to see these paintings in real life. And then they're going to be over there, la, 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 negative, 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 negative. And I thought I was going to lose my mind. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go. And so I think the same thing can be said about critique, where it can be good if somebody helps you actualize and realize your idea and better understand how you can do it. But it can also be bad where somebody derails you or makes you feel less than for doing the work that you're doing. So yeah. Bonnie says this conversation reminds me of a favorite designer of mine, Jonathan Adler. Sorry if I'm spelling it wrong. He was a pop artist that was all about bling and over the top. I loved him and wish I could cover his kind of energy. Yeah, the thing about him is he has references that if you look at his work, you can see those historical references. So as much as he has all this energy and is over the top, it comes from somewhere. It's from things. He's trying to talk, he's contributing to this dialogue and this conversation. So I think it's, if you're interested in that and kind of making your own version of that, I think it's how understanding his form language is understanding his references and his life experiences that pushed him to make those things. I also like, for instance, I really love primitive. Um, they're called prims, and a lot of times those are made by outsider artists, and they're really like rough and they're really simple, and sometimes like the forms are very pared down, and they're not proportional, and they're not this and they're not that, and I just love them. Like I just get so excited by that kind of work, and the thing is I can't make it. I've tried to make it, and it just looks weird to me when I make it. So I don't know. It's one of those things like sometimes, like you can admire somebody, but you also have to be cognizant of the fact that you make what you make, and there's a reason why you do it. And I think part of my thing is that I have this tendency to be a fixer, and I realize that that comes from like generational traumas. I like to make things better, and I like to go in and add this thing that will this extra layer and keep going and going until I make everybody happy. And part of me, my mindset is always going back in and kind of noodling around with it, and I can always go do better and better. And so for me, my like aspiration is making this simple artwork. And I've been saying this since I was a teenager. And I've signed my letter, Simplicity Always, for as long as I can remember. And that's kind of like the goal, is to be simple and minimal. But for me, I'm like the opposite. I'm actually a maximalist. So, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like like I was talking about earlier about having the practical and the aspirational. Bonnie says, I love it, Andrew. You have really a true perspective on this topic. Michelle says, I think all artists need to grow to keep creative. Kathleen says, it's a great positive self support. I'm learning to accept limitations of time, money, etc., and type A friends that don't create and operate on a timeline that isn't best for my creative process. And Lorraine says, thank you so much for an awesome evening. All right. I am hoarse. My voice is starting to fade. Um, and apparently, I have to go and cut some ginkgo leaves. So, with that, friends, I'm going to say farewell. I'm not going to even turn the camera around because it got hot in here and I'm kind of sweaty. Um, and working up. I got my soapbox, y'all, and got a workout. My At least my voice did. Um, and sometimes that happens. Sometimes we start with a project and we do that project and it spurs other conversations. I think anybody who is a longtime follower of us and a part of the AG Bead fam knows that rarely, if ever, do we could go in and out and go according to plan. Oftentimes, if anything, uh, if maybe a book we would write, it'd be called "Going Off Script." But then you would think that it'd be like if you were like an actor or somebody. But anyways, I feel like that for us, that's part of what we do is we go in and we talk about things um and so hopefully, through that kind of conversation, we can all grow and learn. And sometimes I think one of the things it's a good thing to remember is as much as you may be taking away from the things that I'm saying, I'm also getting stuff from this. So by articulating different ideas and thoughts and putting them in words and considering them from a different perspective, I'm also growing and learning as an artist and as a writer and as a person, as a creative person, as a maker. And so it helps me. And so hopefully it helps you all, you know, and so that it's a mutually beneficial exchange. All right. See y'all. Have a good night.